Her name is Panna Dai. She sacrificed her own son for the sake of Mewar's future. The story of Panna Dai is from the land of Mewar, where her story is written in golden words. She was a warrior who never broke down, not even when her son was slaughtered with the sword before her. So let us read the story and understand how and under what circumstances Panna Dai took this step of sacrificing her only son for the sake of the future of Mewar. Let's go to the 16th century. Just imagine the time when Mewar was surrounded by conspiracy and evil thoughts. At that time, Mewar was in the hands of Maharana Sangram Singh, whose dedication and warriorship earned him the title of Rana Sanga. That is why Maharana Sangram Singh was commonly known as Rana Sanga. He belonged to the Sisodia clan of Rajputs and he ruled Mewar from 1508 to 1528. Maharana Sangram Singh had 4 sons, Bhojraj, Ratan Singh, Vikramaditya and Uday Singh. He was the youngest among all. He was just an infant when his father Rana Sanga took his last breath in 1528 after the Battle of Khanwa. In this Battle of Khanwa, Rana Sanga fought against the Mughal Emperor Babur. The battle ended in Mughal victory, but Rana Sanga breathed his last after the battle in 1528. The eldest among his surviving sons was Rana Ratan Singh II. So Maharana Sangram Singh was succeeded by Rana Ratan Singh. He just ruled Mewar for 4 years, that is from 1528 to 1531, as he died in a battle. After the death of Rana Ratan Singh, he was succeeded by his other brother, whose name was Vikramaditya Singh. In the olden days, the kings and queens had got many helpers and maids to help them. The queen, that is Rani Karnavati, had placed Uday Singh in the care of her trusted and loyal maid Panna. She was a wet nurse to Uday. The word wet nurse means a woman employed to take care of another woman's child and give her all the motherly love and care that an original mother would give. So Uday Singh was under the care of Panna Dai. The word Panna means emerald in Hindi. As you can see in the picture here, this is an emerald. Emerald is a precious stone which is used in jewelry. And Dai means wet nurse. Panna had a son of her own, Chandan. Chandan was of the same age as Uday Singh and they were playmates. They used to play together, they used to enjoy together because they were of the same age and they had their same interests. When Vikramaditya adorned the throne of Rana Ratan Singh, he was only 14 years of age. His arrogance was intolerable. He was a temperamental and arrogant ruler. That is, he used to go by his moods. He did not think about the welfare of the people of his kingdom, but he was full of attitude and he was always worried about his own whims. Many nobles and chieftains in the court of Mewar did not like his way of ruling. One day, he abused and misbehaved with an old chieftain in the court. When he did this, all the people of his kingdom as well as the people in the court went against him. He was put under palace arrest. Palace arrest is a kind of imprisonment in the boundaries of one's house. The person is not allowed to move out of the house and he is given all kinds of provisions in the house itself, but he is not allowed to meet the people or none of the people could come in to meet him. When he was placed under palace arrest, there was another question of who is going to sit on the throne of Vikramaditya, because Uday Singh was very small at that time. So, a distant cousin of Maharana Sangram Singh, whose name was Banveer, was appointed as the regent. A regent is a person who is appointed in place of a king who is either of a young age or is incapable of ruling his own kingdom. So Banvir, who was a distant cousin of Maharana Sangram Singh, was appointed as the regent. Now, in his heart of hearts, Banvir always thought himself to be the rightful heir to the throne. He always wanted to fulfill his ambition of becoming a king. But there were two obstacles that remained between him and the throne. And what were the two obstacles? Number one was Vikramaditya himself and his brother Uday Singh. In order to fulfill his ambitions, Banvir decided to kill Vikramaditya and Uday Singh. He killed Rana Vikramaditya in his palace, and with the same sword, he ran towards the palace quarters of Panna Dai with the intention of killing Uday Singh. He thought that if he gets rid of these two obstacles in his path, that is Vikramaditya and Uday Singh, then there would be no one to stop him from becoming the king of Mewar. When Banvir was rushing towards the quarters of Panna Dai to fulfill his ambition, there was a maid servant who spotted Banvir and promptly informed Panna of his intentions. And the intentions were very cruel. When Panna got to know about it, she started thinking how to save the future king of Mewar. She looked at her son and she looked at Uday. Both of them were sleeping at that time. She immediately took the decision. She lifted Uday Singh and put him in a big basket and covered it with fruits. And she called a male servant and told the male servant to take the basket along with Uday Singh to the riverside in a safe place. And on the other side, she placed her own son Chandan in place of Uday Singh. That is, where Uday Singh was sleeping, she placed Chandan on that bed. After a little while, Banvir rushed into the room. He was filled with anger and he carried a sword covered with blood. He was so full of anger that he did not even see who was lying on the bed, whether it was Uday Singh or whether it was some other child. He just saw that a child was sleeping on the bed under the blanket, and he brought his sword down to kill the child, without realizing that the child was actually Chandan, the son of Panna Dai, and not Uday Singh, whom he had intended to kill. After killing Chandan, Banvir announced officially that he is going to be the king of Mewar. All this time, Panna was watching everything, and she could not even mourn the death of her own child. She could not even be unhappy for the death of her own child. She could not express, because if she would have expressed, then Banvir would have come to know that it was not actually Uday Singh, it was someone else. So she gathered up all her courage and she quickly packed a few clothes and some essential items and left the fort to meet the servant at the designated spot. She had told the servant to wait near the river in a safe place. She went to that spot and she took Uday Singh from there to Kumbhalgarh. She knew very well that Uday Singh's identity could not be revealed. If the identity of Uday Singh would be revealed, then his life would be in danger. Panna Dai and Uday Singh went to the house of the governor of Kumbhalgarh, whose name was Asha Shah. They stayed there for a few years. In 1539, there was a chieftain from Mewar who visited Kumbhalgarh, and at that time, Uday Singh was sent to receive him. In 1539, Uday Singh was a young boy. He was introduced as the governor's nephew. It was not told that he was Uday Singh, the heir of the throne of Mewar, but he was introduced as the governor's nephew. However, a king always remains a king, and a prince is always a prince in his mannerisms and personality. So, a person of a royal family can be distinguished from the common people easily. So, the chieftain who had come to visit the governor, he quickly spread this word around that Uday Singh was still alive. He had come to know that this young man was not a common man. He was not the nephew of the governor, but he was Uday Singh. A group of chiefs and noblemen then went to Kumbhalgarh again to interview Uday Singh and Panna Dai. After that, it was clearly known that the young man was actually Uday Singh, the surviving son of Maharana Sangram Singh and the rightful heir to the throne of Mewar. The people announced officially that Uday Singh would be the king, and there was a coronation held at Kumbhalgarh. Coronation is the official ceremony of crowning the king. So he was crowned the king in Kumbhalgarh itself. In 1540, Uday Singh went to Chittor to reclaim his throne. And who was there as the king? Banvir was there as the king. So Uday Singh defeated Banvir and he was declared the Maharana of Mewar. Nobody knows whether Banvir was killed in the battle or whether he escaped, but he was nowhere to be found. Uday Singh was the 53rd ruler of the Mewar dynasty. He later founded the city of Udaipur in Rajasthan. The name of the city is after the name of Uday Singh. And why was all this possible? It was only possible because of the ultimate sacrifice made by Panna Dai and the courage that she showed in order to save the future heir of Mewar. Had she not taken this step to replace Uday Singh with her own son Chandan on that day, then Uday Singh would have been killed. She sacrificed her own son in order to save the kingdom of Mewar. She gave a new meaning to the word sacrifice and loyalty. The greatest sacrifice is when you sacrifice your own happiness for the sake of someone else. So, this was the story of Panna Dai, an epitome of loyalty and courage.